Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Sopranos Street, and today we will be pondering the hypothetical question, what if Vito became boss? In doing so, we will take a bit of a look into the different ways he may have become boss, as well as the obstacles he would face, before diving into how he actually would have been as a boss, his style, his strengths and weaknesses, what he would have needed to succeed, and ultimately whether or not he would have made a successful boss. Of course, the answer to that question is subjective, so please let me know down in the comment section whether or not you think Vito would have made a successful boss and why. Also, please remember to like, subscribe, and share on Facebook, etc., because it really does help.
And?
Before getting into all that, I'm going to address the elephant in the room when it comes to this subject, and that is the situation with his arch nemesis, Finn DeTrolio. That is something that would have had to have been taken care of for Vito to move forward securely and confidently. Some people think that's what he was doing by inviting Finn forcibly to the Yankees game where he would have killed him. Finn had his own theory.
Well, maybe he wants to fuck me and then kill me.
I did not come down here just to get jerked off, you know.
Not that killing Finn wouldn't have raised its own problems, as he was with Meadow at the time, but either way, it would have had to have been taken care of. So for the rest of the video, we will operate under the assumption that the Finn situation and all of its causes and consequences won't be an issue. This brings us to how and when he could have become boss. Obviously, Tony Soprano would have to be out of the picture, either due to prison or death. If it were due to prison, then it would have happened after the series ended, so in order for it to have happened during the time frame of the series, it would have to be due to death, and when dealing with death, there are three possible causes. A natural death, murder, or an accident. If it was an accident, then from the guy's point of view, it would be viewed essentially the same as either a natural death or a murder. If they thought it was actually an accident, then it would fall somewhat in the same school of thought as a natural death, in the sense that shit happens and that's just life. If they didn't really think it was an accident, then it would be viewed as a hit. So for the purposes of discussion, we are only really dealing with natural death or murder. As to when he may have become boss, we can really only start looking at the time starting in Season 5, because before that, he was really a nobody.
Can I help you?
Miss Gaeta, we had to put in the ramp.
What ramp?
For your husband. We're also supposed to, oral to the toilets.
But even after he rose up the ranks, he still would have had a lot of obstacles, the most obvious of which is the number of people, such as Sil, that would be in line in front of him, and if Tony's death was due to murder, his problems would multiply. First off, he couldn't let anyone think it was him, which would be hard to do, even if he had nothing to do with it, because of his constant behind-the-scenes lobbying. If anyone did suspect him, he would be done, especially during the Johnny Sack era, because he would have also found opposition from New York.
But New York and Sopranos have long-standing ties, and that's not going to change.
The only window of opportunity during Johnny Sack's reign for Vito to make a move without New York's intervention would have been immediately following Joey Peep's murder. During that period, he might have been able to play it off like it was New York's move, but even then there would still be people in front of him, and if New York supported Vito for boss, given his relationship with Phil Leotardo, it wouldn't be long before people started assuming Vito was in on it. As long as Christopher's still alive, that could be a problem for Vito. So if it was going to happen by murder, it would have had the best chance towards the end of the series during the Phil Leotardo era while the war was going on. If it was going to happen earlier in the series, his best bet would have been if Tony died during the coma after Sil began to realize he didn't really want the job.
Calm the fuck down. Let me think. Mornings are better. I'll come up with a solution. I don't want you having to worry about it.
Okay.
What's going on?
Would you move your car, please, sir?
Sil, I didn't hear from you.
At this point, who would have been left to challenge? Maybe Carlo? Maybe Christopher with Sil's backing? But other than that, who? Paulie Walnuts isn't respected in that capacity. Patsy would just be glad Tony was dead. Bobby's basically a leaf in the wind. And we are left with Benny Fazio, criminal mastermind. Phil's support from New York probably would have been enough to make him boss, but how would he have been as a boss? Vito's desire to become boss is very clear, and he is constantly maneuvering to achieve that end. he took control of the supposedly cursed Aprile crew, despite being very aware of the growing list of tragedies that had befallen all of its previous leaders.
Given the history of Spinal Tap drummers in the past, do you have any fears for your life?
When I did join, they did tell me, they kind of took me aside and said, well, Mick, it's like this. And it did kind of freak me out a bit, but it can't always happen.
Right.
To every, can it?
Right.
I mean,
the law of averages
says
says you will survive.
Yeah.
Because it was a cash cow, and he quickly showed a penchant for being an earner. Now, he did show a tendency to get obnoxious about money, but so did all of them, so I don't think that would have been a deal breaker. Ultimately, I think that's the style he would have brought to the family. Sort of a Paul Castellano-ish steering towards business, as opposed to, say, Paulie Walnuts, who probably would have acted more like Nicky Scarfo out of Philly. Also, Vito's connections with New York through Phil would have minimized the friction of the transition and allowed the money and no-show, no-work jobs to continue unabated. His wheeling and dealing nature would have probably also helped him develop new income streams for the family, as well as develop other connections, be they in politics, business, or law enforcement, that would be necessary for a successful boss. His wheeling and dealing nature might have also proved to be a big problem, as he may have a tendency to overextend himself like he did with Gene Pontecorvo.
It's not so silly when you think about it. I'm a top earner now. It's not out of the realm of possibility that I could be the boss of this family one day.
As it turned out, Gene was a snitch, but they wouldn't have known that, so for the purposes of this video, that's irrelevant. Unlike Vito, Tony played this request for retirement perfectly. Tony postponed answering, sent Chris for the favor, and Sil to say no. Gene can't really say much to either Chris or Sil about what he did and what he thought he would get, because both of them would just say,
That's not my department.
And he can't go back to Tony because Tony never promised anything to begin with. On the other side, had the timeline played out a little differently and Gene been alive when Vito became boss, he might have been in a bit of a sticky situation. At that point, Gene would be expecting retirement, so Vito would either have to deny him that, kill him, or let him retire. If Vito were to just deny him, he would have become a bitter enemy of Vito's moving forward. If Vito killed him, he would have to hope he did it before Gene told anyone about his being allowed to retire, and if he was allowed to retire, Pandora's box would have been opened. This wouldn't have been a medical-related retirement, similar to Junior's, where he couldn't do the job anymore. This would be a retirement because he didn't feel like doing it anymore. And once that becomes a possibility, Vito would be nothing more than a crime general contractor, relying on the voluntary compliance of crime subcontractors on a job-by-job basis. It would be impossible to maintain an ongoing operation like this. So while this particular instance may have shown a possible problem with that style, as mentioned before, it does have benefits and most of the successful bosses have utilized it. But why is Vito so good at wheeling and dealing? I can see where part of his aptitude may have developed out of necessity due to the fact that he is not an intimidating presence at all. He was not physically intimidating like Tony, Weebay from The Wire, or Jimmy Conway from Goodfellas, and even when he tries to be...
That's really nice, Vito, but I don't know if I can...
Don't pull that all shuck shit with me. You're fucking going.
He isn't. That's only intimidating to Finn because he's a civilian. If Vito had tried that with another gangster, they might have just laughed in his face. Vito also doesn't have the quiet and composed type of intimidating presence that is personified more in characters like Johnny Sack, Stringer Bell, or Uncle Paulie, and may have resorted to negotiating because he needed allies to be at all formidable. As a result, he would probably also want to install a fearsome underboss, and of all the people left, Paulie Walnuts might actually be the best candidate. Assuming Sil stayed on as consigliere, between him and Vito, strategy, etc. was covered. All they would need was an unyielding presence to put a face on the concept of punishment, and with full support from above him, Paulie Walnuts certainly would have been that. Ultimately, I think Vito would have needed a lot of things to go right in order to make boss, even more so than the usual amount of good fortune needed for anyone to get that title. But if he did, and if he managed to get settled into that position, he could have made a good boss. At his best, I could see him being like a Carmine Sr., a behind-the-scenes puppeteer with connections everywhere. At his worst, I think his tenure would have been shorter than Doc Santoro's and would have ended in much the same fashion, since many of the people in his family already didn't like him, and like any boss, he would have enemies he didn't even know about. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Soprano Street, and let me know what kind of boss you think Vito would have made. As always, please like, subscribe, share on Facebook, etc., and I'll see you at the next score.